before means nothing now. The 2021 openers in the books, and Michigan was dominant and really met expectations or possibly exceeded many, including Vegas as a 16-point favorite, routing Western Michigan. We got Justin Rowe on the line from Blue by 90 podcast. Please check out his podcast and, of course, follow him on Twitter at Justin Rowe 92. Justin, how's it going?
Doing well. I was just saying to you, it's just good to have a full, official weekend of college football back. We're not even at week 0. It's week 1 and it's complete. We've got one more game tonight. But it was a fun weekend to be back just watching college football. I was at Michigan Stadium as well, 110,000 there, and it just feels good to be back. That's for sure.
Western Michigan put a touchdown on the board to make it 7-7. Then after that, Michigan put it away. And like we talked about before we started to record, the type game that you're not going to come away and say, wow, what a performance, because they played some top-level team. But those games are on the schedule too, and Michigan didn't slough through a 24-13 win. They laid down the hammer, won the game, won it convincingly, did what you should do against a mid-tier MAC team.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Western Michigan had 19 starters, I believe it was, coming back this year. So they're an experienced team. I don't know if they're the most talented team in the MAC, but they're a competitor in the MAC. They're no lay down in the MAC. And so with that being said, Michigan did what it was supposed to do against Western Michigan. And some people thought, because of what happened last year and because, we didn't know what was going on with Harbaugh, and there's a whole lot of headlines this offseason, how would Michigan come out in their first game back in the Big House with fans? And they laid down, the hammer. And so it was good to see. I thought in the beginning of the game, they struggle a little bit to establish the run, especially between the tackles. But once they got through it, they started wearing down Western Michigan. That offensive line broke open some holes. I thought Josh Gaddis did pretty well. Offensive coordinator had some creative plays to get some stuff around the edge, get his quarterback working, but not too much. And then Mike McDonald on the defensive side did well to hold Western Michigan. Kyle Ellaby is a great quarterback too. I think we could see him possibly at the next level, maybe as a practice squad type guy in the NFL. But all in all, I think it was a good performance by Michigan.
Of course, we want to start with the quarterback position, much made out of Cade McNamara, of course, winning the job. Jim Harbaugh being very specific and detailed about why Cade McNamara won the job over an experienced Alan Bowman and also, of course, the 5-star J.J. McCarthy. Cade McNamara got the support of that ground game that you talked about that took a few series to get rolling. But once they did, my goodness, almost 8 yards per carry, 335 on the ground. Cade McNamara, though the load was off his shoulders, but he hit 9 of 11, looked like he was running the offense capably.
Yeah, he ended up as, those stats aren't going to jump out. I don't think he's started his Heisman campaign with the stats from week 1, right? But, you look at his passing efficiency rating. He was number 1 in the Big Ten and second in the country in passing efficiency rating last week. So, that's what Jim Harbaugh wants out of his quarterbacks. I think when you look at J.J. McCarthy, you know he's got the arm. He's got the talent. But with Cade McNamara, we talked about it. He's smart. He's not going to make those mistakes. He showed exactly what I think we want Cade McNamara to show. Reminded me a lot of Jake Rudock under Harbaugh in one of his first years here, right? And so I think Cade McNamara solidified himself as QB1. He made sure, even though JJ came in and threw a heck of a ball across the field to Dalen Baldwin, I thought Cade did really well. He controlled the game. He looked like a veteran leader for a guy that's coming into a game for the first time under fans as a starter for Michigan. That can be intimidating when there's 110,000, even if it's your home crowd, right? He looked cool and calm. I thought he handled the pressure well. I thought he didn't make many mistakes at all. Even he had one incomplete pass, essentially. The other one was tipped at the line. I just thought Cade, if you're talking about exceeding expectations, Cade McNamara did that.
Justin, I'm not in the middle of the Michigan football circles, but I'm enough on social media and have enough contact. When we produce videos here, we're getting 5, 10, 15,000 views thanks to you. And of course, I've got that Michigan football contact. And even with that detachment to a certain extent, that throw had enough of an impression on people that you can imagine. So I'm guessing that you heard even more in regards to, wow, the jaw dropping. And that's fine to have that jaw dropping. Hey, look at what we've got here later in the season or next year or whenever, but people go a little bit overboard. That's not managing a game, running the offense play by play, series by series, red zone situations, all that goes on the responsibility of a quarterback. That's talent.
Talent alone, which I will say the roar in the big house on that throw, that was the biggest roar of the entire game, which is kind of funny because they had other huge plays as well. But people were waiting. He got a standing ovation. JJ McCarthy did on his way in, when he took his first snap. And then when he makes that throw, people went nuts. And so I agree with you. I think what that showed to us was that JJ McCarthy has that talent. Someday he is going to be very, very special for the Michigan Wolverines. I still don't think that day is today or next week or even maybe any week this season. I think that he is a freshman. What I've heard from practice, he still makes a decent amount of freshman mistakes. He's a young guy. He's got the talent in his legs and his arm and everything, and he will be very, very good. He's not quite there. I think that's why we heard all offseason and leading up in camp Jim Harbaugh saying, no, Cade Mcnamara is our guy, and we're going to stick with him. And so I don't think there's any, even though there might be a lot of people out there that want to see that more. I saw somebody texted me something. Is JJ McCarthy the Trevor Lawrence to our Kelly Bryant of Cade McNamara? I don't think that's quite true. I don't think you can say JJ McCarthy is freshman Trevor Lawrence. Freshman Trevor Lawrence was one of the most unbelievable performances in all of college football history, right? So I like the analogy a little bit because you've got the talent, versus the seniority there. But I still think Cade can do. We saw Cade make very good throws. That's what I thought too. It wasn't like, Cade dropped that ball into Ronnie Bell for a 74-yard touchdown. He dropped another one that was called pass interference that shouldn't have been. So it wasn't like Cade McNamara was. He was dinking and dunking a little bit, but when he took his shots downfield, he dropped some dimes as well. So that's where I think it makes a little bit of a difference. It's not like I don't think there's anything you can't do with Cade McNamara that you could do with JJ right now.
Yeah, the Dabo Sweeney call on Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence was, I know I've got an ACC championship team. I want to win the whole thing. I'm going to take a slight risk that this guy's not ready, but he's a generational quarterback. Of course, he didn't know that necessarily at the time, but he had a pretty good idea versus more of an athlete. Cade McNamara can throw more efficiently and more accurately than Kelly Bryant. So the offense is in good hands with Cade McNamara. We've now seen him for 3 games almost in total. All right. You mentioned the proficiency of the running game, and I don't think that should be taken as a given. Of course, you expect Michigan to push around Western Michigan, but I look at box scores all over the country and watch games from all over the country, and there are plenty of big teams that you expect to knock around a lesser opponent, and it just doesn't happen. So 335 on the ground is impressive. The question I've got for you is Blake Coram with 14 carries, Hassan Haskins with 13, Donovan Edwards, of course, everybody excited to see him as well, comes in with 6 carries. Do you think that's any indication of what the distribution is going to be when we get to a big game, i.e., Washington this week?
Yeah, I was very impressed with Josh back room. That was one of the big things that everyone talked about last year. It was a huge problem. They couldn't figure it out between Zach Charbonnet, who, by the way, is dominating for UCLA in a win over LSU this week. So I truly think he struggled last year, especially. He had 3 legitimate RB1s. And he didn't know how to do it. And I think Zach Charbonnet transferring, although a lot of Michigan fans out there are upset with how well he's playing at UCLA and saying, why couldn't we do that with him here? Right now, they have essentially, Donovan Edwards didn't see a single snap until that 3rd quarter when he went in with JJ McCarthy. So it wasn't like he was getting a few here and there in the first half. And I don't think he will see a whole lot of action down the stretch. I think it'll be pretty evenly split between Blake Coram and Hassan Haskins. I actually could see Blake Coram surpassing Haskins a little bit. Blake Coram really showed out. I think if you were surprised at all by anything, it was how well Blake Coram played this week. He could run. We've seen his speed a lot. He can get to the edge and run around. He ran through the middle quite well as well. So I think he could do, more than just the swing passes and sweeps and things like that we saw in the past. So I think they've got a really good two-headed monster right now with Haskins and Coram, and I think Gaddis is going to stick with that. With Gaddis's comments before week 1 saying we want our identity to be to run that ball, to pound and ground. And I thought they did that really well. Like I said, it was a little slow start. I'm sure, you're just figuring it out. Michigan's got a new offensive line. But I also saw, according to Pro Fantasy Focus, Andrew Vastardis, 6th-year senior, walk-on, was the highest graded center in the entire country this week. So that's a guy that we thought was going to be just kind of a serviceable guy. A lot of people thought that he shouldn't be a starter, but he earned the captain role as well. That offensive line, I thought, played really, really well, and I think they're going to progress. I've already given props to Josh Gaddis about 4 times already, but I thought his creativity really helped the offensive line in this offense get going. They weren't just running up the middle time after time. They ran off tackle. They ran up the middle. They ran zone reads. They ran, reverses around the edge for a 70-yard touchdown. I really liked how this offense's tempo and creativity and distribution went.
And that's the mark of a good offensive coordinator who knows the personnel and knows where the strengths and weaknesses are. And it's not just cookie cutter. This is my offense, boys. You need to be able to run it. Now, you do, of course, in competing for championship level play, want to get to a point where you're not having to throw away 30% of the playbook because you got to hide a particular unit or the offensive line's weak or whatever. But you get to that point. The Western Michigan defense was pretty atrocious last season. So these numbers are great. The performance amazing, but at the same time, to be taken into consideration. On the defensive side, though, Western Michigan was the most explosive team in the nation by some measurements last year. Again, you say, and Kalen Ellaby, a veteran quarterback coming back. So the defensive performance and giving up just one meaningful touchdown is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I was impressed with Mike McDonald, and I thought that they didn't do anything crazy, but they all did their job. And so it was a performance by this defense that I think a lot of people, including myself, expected them, especially with the secondary doing what it did last year and everything you just said about Western Michigan's offense. I thought they'd give up some big plays. They'd leave somebody one-on-one, get burnt, something like that. They really didn't do that. I will say there were a couple times where Aiden Hutchinson was so close to being to the quarterback, and then he'd find somebody right at the last second that came open. That happened a decent amount in the first quarter, but they figured that out. And so with the crossing routes and out routes and things like that, I'd rather have them be giving those up for 8 to 10 yards rather than those bombs that they were dealing with last year, on deep go routes and things like that. So I thought this defense played really well. What I noticed is that I don't think there was anybody with over 4 tackles. I believe it was completely spread out for this defense. So it wasn't like somebody was out there dominating completely or really taking all of it. I really liked how that defense, I think, like I said, they did their job. They weren't doing too much. We didn't have to rely on a Dax Hill. Like last year, Dax Hill was coming across the field, making a tackle 25 yards down because nobody else would get to that guy. We didn't have to do that this year. We didn't have to see that. So even though I will say Dax Hill is a special player, he made play after play after play. It wasn't him making up for other people's weaknesses, but he still made very good plays. There were a couple screen passes that he completely blew up, looked a little like Jabril Peppers back in the day. And so I really like this defense going forward. I thought the linebacking crew, Josh Ross and Nikai Hill-Green, really stepped up. That's a core that really struggled last year. Obviously, Green did not play last year. He was, more of a backup or third string. And so that group really stepped up, and I was pretty impressed by this defense as well.
Folks, we got Justin Rowe on the line from Blue by 90 podcast. Please check out his podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Justin Rowe 92. Joins us on a regular basis to break down Michigan football with actually a game to talk about. So this is a bit refreshing, and a big win, 33-point win over Western Michigan. And now there will be possibly, we'll have to see with the rankings coming out this week, a top 25 team on the field, but it was supposed to be Washington. They were the preseason top 25. Michigan, right, unranked, but maybe I'm sure they'll get votes this week after an impressive showing. So before we get to the Huskies, Justin, unfortunately, Michigan's going to take the field without Ronnie Bell. It's one of those things in athletics, period, but especially in football. And regardless of who you root for, you hate to see it. These guys, they bust their tails the entire year to get on the field. And then game one, he goes for a 76-yard touchdown and then knocked out for the season.
Yeah, I mean, this is a gut punch if there ever was one, and something that we should be celebrating pretty much everything that happened on the field for Michigan this week. This feels like a sour taste in just about everybody's mouth, right? And so I think that the thing is, there's a couple things to the Ronnie Bell injury. One, he looked like he emerged as going to be a top wide receiver, not only for Michigan, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. He really stepped it up, his speed, his route running, all that stuff. He made like I said, an unbelievable catch that didn't count, one-handed on the sideline. It looked like Odell Beckham Jr.
Yep.
It was unreal, really. And then his 74-yard touchdown where he just completely separated and had nobody in his rear views there. So he sets the tone for Michigan, and he's a captain. He's a senior. I'm hoping that he will come back for, a redshirt year or something like that. I think he still gets a COVID year anyway, so there are a couple options there. But I know a lot of Michigan fans agree with that, hoping that he'll come back. But I think the biggest thing that Ronnie Bell that you're going to miss is his leadership. He was a guy that I thought he does everything the right way. Where Michigan in the past, the locker room, the culture, we talked about it, wasn't great last year. I think Ronnie Bell was a lone bright spot in their culture. Works his butt off, blocks, runs hard on every play. He's that guy. And I think his leadership, he wants to win it. I can't remember whose quote it was. It was one of the other wide receivers said he wants to be the best at every single thing he does, right? And so more than his talent, I think this team is going to miss his leadership, because what's going to happen is an A.J. Henning or a Dalen Baldwin or Roman Wilson are going to step up. They'd have, nowhere near the experience or the leadership that a Ronnie Bell is going to have. And so, although I'm sure he's going to lead a little bit from the sideline, it's a real blow to Michigan.
So Washington comes in, of course, the big non-conference game, and surprisingly on the road to Ann Arbor, Washington gets tripped up by Montana. So they're playing football in Montana. Apparently, that's an FCS school. Not to discredit them in any way. It's just a bit of a joke because it's just unexpected. You cross those off as, okay, Washington plays Michigan in week 2. And I saw a couple highlights of the game, and that was it, in a box score. But Washington apparently could not mount any offense in that game against a Montana team. And Washington, again, enough respect for them to be rated top 25 to start the season. But of course, there are overreactions to week 1. We've seen teams, even in the Big Ten, really good teams that turned out to be good, 8-4, 9-3 teams that lost to an FCS or a MAC team or somebody early in the season. Akron, Northwestern lost to Akron a couple years ago, went to the Big Ten championship game. So Washington's still capable, can't overreact to week 1.
And Jim Harbaugh came out in his presser today. He said week 2 is the hardest week to prepare for because it's the first time that teams are going out and making adjustments to what they saw on film from week 1. And so I have to assume that Washington's going to make quite a few adjustments. So they maybe, Jim Harbaugh and his coaching staff, they might not know what to look for. They could see a totally different Washington team in week 2 from what they saw in week 1. And so I don't think you can just write this off as a victory already. I also think the Pac-12 holy smokes, is the Pac-12 just kind of all over the place right now too? You know, you've got USC and UCLA as the only real teams, I guess, emerging from there. And Washington was going to be seen as one of those teams that would compete. But now what do you know, we don't know what to get from them. You know, the storyline from Washington coming back to Ann Arbor too is Giles Jackson is going to be back in the big house for the first time since he transferred. And so I actually didn't see what Giles Jackson did in game one. I didn't bother to check that
I was
box
working on that.
I didn't imagine it was very good. Anything good coming from it from the offensive side. But you know, I think that there were a couple things. Michael Barrett, who actually got beat out by Nikai Hill-Green for that inside linebacker spot, he earlier said, I hope Giles doesn't come across the middle on us in week 2. So there's a little bit of something going on there between Giles and the team. I'm sure that he's still friends with a lot of those guys as well, but there's going to be some jawing. There's going to be some back and forth, I'm sure. And that'll be fun in the big house, and having it be a primetime night game for Michigan against a somewhat premier opponent, I think is going to be fun.
Giles Jackson caused 4 passes against Montana. Okay. 15 yards. Didn't exactly get loose from anyone. Less than 4 yards a catch.
Well, I mean, that's it helps, I guess, this defensive secondary, who we still thought that the secondary was going to be, you know, not great, but they looked pretty serviceable against Western. This Washington game was going to be one that I circled as, all right, this is a test right now. This is your first official test on, you know, can you keep up with a premium D1 level team, their speed, their power, all that stuff. And so I still think we'll get a good taste of that. Giles Jackson, I don't care what he's doing, he's still one of the fastest players on the field whenever he takes the field against anybody, right? And so they're going to try and exploit Michigan secondary, as he probably saw all last year from the sideline. So I see that, you know, I see Giles and I see this receiving core. They're going to try and get loose, that's for sure.
And again, if this Washington offensive effort against Montana means anything, they basically couldn't run the ball, 2.5 yards per carry. So then they went to the air 46 times and they completed a fair share, 27 of 46, not great, but it's okay. They basically couldn't create explosive plays. 226 yards on 27 of 46 is nothing. So that's just a head scratcher right there. 7 points on the board against Montana. All right.
It sure is.
Washington.
To your point about the explosive plays, I didn't touch on this when I was talking Michigan's offense as well. Michigan's offense, that was what it was lacking, right? Was the explosive plays. It felt like in the past 2 years, they were dinking and dunking. They're running the ball. They could never get the ball to a Nico Collins or Donovan Peoples-Jones, you know, very often for that long ball. And that's what they did on Saturday. They had a 74-yard, they had a 76-yard pass to Ronnie Bell, a 74-yard run from A.J. Henning, and a 69-yard pass to Dalen Baldwin. And so I thought that was pretty impressive. The other stat that I did some counting here, they had 14 of their 60 plays from the offense were over 10 yards. So I really liked what I saw from that perspective, that they were getting down the field. It wasn't all out routes. It wasn't just trying to just kind of, you know, chuck down the field a little bit. It was actually throwing the ball down the field. It was getting people going towards the end zone and getting into the end zone. So that's what I liked seeing from Michigan as well.
Michigan fans said explosive rate is not going to stay at that pace. You're not going to hit like 360 plus plays per game, or the 14 for 60. That's a pretty incredible rate. I don't know what that percent. I saw a lot of explosive rates as I studied teams during the offseason. I forget what a good rate, more like in the 10% range is supposed to be good, 10 or 12%. So it's a good indication.
23%. So yeah, it's pretty solid.
Justin Rowe, Blue by 90 podcast. Check him out right there. It's Justin Rowe 92 on Twitter. Justin, we always appreciate you stopping by. It's nice to talk to you with a smile on your face after a Michigan win. Things look good for Saturday night, but as you just outlined, hey, expect a tough Washington team to come in, probably with a chip on their shoulders, not wanting to be 0-2, of course. So I still expect a pretty decent ball game.
Yeah, Washington's one of those teams that was supposed to, smack around Montana and FCS school. I'm sure we'll talk about that in just a second. But no, overall, I thought it was a really good performance. I thought Michigan would cover the spread. I had them by about 20 or 23, I think, in my pregame prediction. But it was tough to say coming in. I also said that I thought this could be a close game in the fourth quarter, depending on how things played out, because Western Michigan has enough talent. I thought Caleb Ellaby, their quarterback, is one of the top group of 5 quarterbacks in the country. Michigan's breaking in a new defense against a team that likes to throw. And talking to a Western Michigan writer before the game, asking, okay, what's the strength of Caleb Ellaby's game? He said decision making. And I was thinking against a new look defense, trying to find its footing. That could be a little bit of a problem if they got going. But they tightened up, like you said, it was 7-7. But then I thought Michigan made some good adjustments, and it was a good first test for Mike Macdonald in his first game as defensive coordinator. They went with, cover 2 basically the rest of the game, manned up a little more. I know that's, something that Don Brown did, but he didn't have the safeties over the top like Mike Macdonald was able to employ. So I thought the adjustments were good. They stayed stout on the inside, despite, like Jim Harbaugh talked about today, sometimes there were only 5 guys in the box, but they were still able to stop the run for the most part. So I thought defensively it was good. And then the offense, it was just, exactly what they said they were going to do. They said they were going to run the ball more this season. That was an emphasis. They did that right out of the gate. There was some grumbling from the fans on some of those. They even ran it on 3rd down one time, got it to 4th and short, ended up picking up the 4th. But there was some grumbling because they didn't throw there for a little bit in the first quarter, but they wanted to establish the run. They used that to set other things up. Once they got Ronnie Bell, who I'm sure we'll talk about here as well. Unfortunate that he went down with a season-ending injury, but they got him in single coverage in the slot, hit a 76-yard touchdown pass to him. So everything kind of had a purpose, and I thought after last season when they were just kind of throwing stuff at the wall, that was a big sign for me coming in after some of the tweaks that Jim Harbaugh made in the offseason. So I thought it was as smooth as this opener could have gone, basically. You faced a little adversity early on the defensive side of things, saw how your first-time coordinator adjusted, still some things to clean up. I thought they could have been a little better against the run, but again, they were, not stacking the box by any means as well. So, it's going to be interesting, and we'll talk about it, but this Washington game, now that they come in 0-1 after what you would assume would have been a cupcake type of game for them, only able to put up 7 points. So, this Michigan team, I think, can't rest on their laurels, especially after last season. You go back, they beat Minnesota on the road, a ranked Minnesota team to open the year, and then they fall to Michigan State, who had just lost to Rutgers the year before. So there are so many parallels here, and I think a lot of these same guys that were on that Michigan team a year ago know exactly what situation they're in, and I don't expect them to necessarily, have a big letdown this week.
Yeah, I think we tend to overreact to the game 1 results, and of course they're meaningful. The teams went out there and played, so we have to evaluate what we played. But yeah, we tend to elevate certain teams, and probably more than that, we completely dismiss other teams that they must be trash. They looked awful, right. And so Washington's not there. There's no ability there to contend with Michigan or anybody else. Okay, we've got plenty of examples from every year where teams are losing FCS teams, group of 5 teams, and then they come back and have a strong season. So not saying that's a good thing for Washington, and I'm not predicting them to go to the playoffs or anything, but they're still capable, still a talented football team. But we'll get to the Huskies in a second. More so, the offense is going to grab the attention with the 47 points, all those explosive plays, 335 on the ground. But I'm going to go defense first, because the Western Michigan defense was pretty deplorable last year. So Michigan took advantage of that. But the Western Michigan offense last year had the highest explosive play rate in the country, scored tons of points. And of course, Michigan gave up the big plays last year. But like you said, after that early touchdown to make it 7-7, they didn't score a meaningful touchdown after that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something that I wrote on my Monday morning quarterback column this morning, was this Michigan offense made those explosive plays like you mentioned. They were one of 2 teams in college football, coincidentally joining Ohio State as teams that had plays from 60 yards or more from scrimmage. They had 3 from 50 yards or more, 4 from 40 yards or more. So the offense was making those big plays that we didn't see a year ago. But the defense under Mike Macdonald, which is, I think going to be a little bit more willing to give up some underneath routes, maybe the flat, as long as they don't give up those big plays. And they didn't in this game against a capable offense, as you mentioned, with Caleb Ellaby at quarterback. So 5 plays only of 20 yards or of 10 yards or more. So I thought that was, a big positive for Michigan, being able to limit big plays for Western Michigan. Again, an offense that can make those. And they tightened up as the game went on. Aiden Hutchinson from that new outside linebacker edge spot, I thought really looked good. His moves were on point. And I wrote this after the game as well. He looked like a guy that hadn't been able to hit an opposing quarterback for a year, because that's exactly the case. He got hurt early last season, came out guns blazing. Dax Hill on the defensive side as well was playing a nickel spot. He was free safety all last season, but they went with the nickel basically the entire game, and he was all over the field, as Jim Harbaugh described it following the game, and I thought the same. So those are kind of your 2 cornerstones. The rest of the defense I thought was in position, which you couldn't always say last season. And they've still got some young guys that I think need to grow as the season goes on, but I think there's some potential there to at least be, they look like a competent group again. They looked better than that in this game, but again, it's Western Michigan. You want to see it against a better opponent, but I think there's a lot of things to build on.
So when you mentioned some of those younger guys, anyone in particular that hasn't seen much of the field previously that is happening to step into a role that showed us something?
Yeah, I would say Nikai Hill-Green stepping in as the starting inside linebacker next to Josh Ross, the captain. He took that role over early on in camp when everyone else was penciling in Michael Barrett to be the starting inside backer. No, it's the second year player, Nikai Hill-Green. I thought he did pretty well. They had him blitzing a couple times, and then they kind of, were able to find a cutback lane and things like that. So I don't think that was necessarily his fault each and every time, but he finished with 4 tackles. Another guy that flashed was Mike Morris, a third-year guy who was playing kind of a defensive end type of spot with his hand in the dirt inside where Aiden Hutchinson was playing. He didn't start, but he was able to come in, and I thought made a couple of big plays, including on a 3rd and 2, he had a tackle for loss where in the second quarter, which I thought really, springboarded Michigan to put the route on, because they got a big stop there after Western Michigan had scored, and then gained some yards on the next drive before stalling out. So that was kind of a turning point. Mazzie Smith is a guy that we talked about in preseason camp as well, who started at the nose guard spot. I thought he acquitted himself pretty well at the line of scrimmage. He didn't make a ton of plays, but he was able to kind of get that push and take up a couple gaps, was really all you're looking for out of that spot at the very least. So, I think those are kind of the names to watch as you go forward. How are those guys going to progress? They're not finished products yet. And, Jim Harbaugh said after the game, they're not in love with the game they played. There's still a lot of things they can build on, but I thought they did quite a few things. Quite a few things were a step in the right direction, especially on defense.
Got Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine. Catch him on Rivals, thewolverine.com. And Clayton joins us on a regular basis to break down the maize and blue. And Clayton, it's got to feel good to actually, we're talking about a football game we just watched, and then we get to talk about another one that's coming up on Saturday night. Man, the off season was forever. All right, so looking at the offense, before we get to all the good stuff, unfortunately, Ronnie Bell makes one of the best plays you're ever going to see that didn't count with a one-handed catch, and then he makes a 76-yard touchdown, and unfortunately, just the nature of the game. And I feel horrible, regardless of who you root for, when guys are busting their tails, working out, watching film, doing all the things in the weight room, everything all year. They get on the field. There's only 12 of these games, and gets knocked out the first game. So no Ronnie Bell for the rest of the season. So just talk about that, and then obviously the adjustments that are going to have to be made in regards to targets for the other guys. Yeah,
super unfortunate for Ronnie Bell. He was having a heck of a game before he got hurt on a 31-yard punt return deep into Western Michigan territory. You mentioned the one-handed catch. That was nasty. I thought it was a bad call. They called offensive pass interference on him. I thought there was a little bit of hand fighting both ways, but no grab or no. He pushed off a little bit, but he was getting tugged as that play went on as well. And then I mentioned earlier the 76-yard touchdown, had single coverage in a beautiful ball by Cade McNamara, was able to go and get it, break free, and find the end zone. So he was having a great game. He kind of looked, at least in the limited action we saw him at, like a different Ronnie Bell. He had led the club in receiving the last 2 years. So he's been good. He's been solid. He's been a big piece of this offense for a couple of years, but he kind of looked like he hit that next level now that he's a fourth-year guy. He's a senior. This is his wide receiver room. He's the heart and soul of the room, as some of the guys said today. And then he goes down. Luckily, we've been hearing a lot about how deep this wide receiver room is. Again, you can't really replace the top guy, but if you can get good production from a couple guys, and I'll mention a couple names here, but a couple guys that are going to step in, you shuffle some pieces around and you see what you can do with those guys. But Dalen Baldwin is number one, kind of a bigger receiver that can play that outside receiver spot. Jackson State transfer, who led the SWAC in receiving yards last season. He had the touchdown thrown by J.J. McCarthy in the second half there, which was a hell of a play by J.J. But so he showed he could go and get the ball downfield. I think that Roman Wilson is another guy, second-year guy, kind of more of a speedster. You saw him on an end-around pick up 30-some yards in the second half as well. So he's got some speed, but he's going to have to now show he can go up and make some catches downfield and be that reliable guy. That's the biggest thing I thought Ronnie Bell has brought throughout his career, is just how reliable he was. Third downs, finding soft spots in zones. And now we're seeing that he can, stretch the field a little bit more as he's progressed. So those are the two biggest names, but everybody else as well. I mean, AJ Henning is more of a slot receiver, but if you shuffle pieces around, I think he's going to get some more snaps. I think he is potentially going to be the punt returner as well, which is obviously where Ronnie Bell got hurt, returning punts. So they need someone to step in there. So it's going to be a collective effort. I truly think it is going to be. That sometimes is a cliche, everybody needs to step up. But I think it is in this case because Michigan's got several options. No great option, in my opinion, that would, live up to what Ronnie Bell was, but a few names that can fill in the production. And then Cornelius Johnson, a guy who's already starting, I think is going to get more opportunity as well. You have to mention that the guys that are already out there are going to have to produce at a higher level in addition.
Folks, we're talking Michigan football with Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverines. So check out, the Rivals platform. The quality there, thewolverine.com. Clayton Sayfie's work right there on Rivals. And subscribe to our Michigan channel. Understand that we've got post-game coverage after every Michigan football game right on our Voice of College Football Michigan channel. Like these videos, share these videos on the social media, and, of course, again, subscribe. All right, Clayton, I intentionally backed up the quarterbacks to the end of the conversation because everybody's going to talk first. Quarterbacks. But I wanted to highlight some other things there. So Cade McNamara didn't have to shoulder the offense in regards to throwing the ball downfield constantly. The running game was that good. But what do you think you saw out of Cade McNamara? And you mentioned the one ridiculous throw from J.J. McCarthy, which I know got tons of people excited.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that was Jim Harbaugh said they didn't come into this game with any sort of set script on how they wanted the, quarterback snaps and everything to play out. But I thought this was just about ideal. You got 2.5 quarters out of Cade McNamara, and he played, I thought, outstanding. He had 3 deep balls that he threw, and they were all perfectly thrown, including the Ronnie Bell one that didn't count, but also including the Ronnie Bell one that did count for a 76-yard touchdown. He threw a couple scores, 9 for 11, 135 yards. His 2 incompletions were batted down at the line of scrimmage. So this was about as flawless of a performance as you could have had in this kind of limited action. They didn't throw the ball much. 11 throws is not many. They were, like we said earlier, leaning on that running game. But I thought he looked really solid. And this is really the stat to know when it comes to Cade McNamara. 14 scores either a field goal or a touchdown on, I think, 21 or 22 drives that he's engineered since he came into that Wisconsin game last season, eventually won the job over after that Rutgers game. So this guy, the number one stat for a quarterback is winning, right? Every coach will say that. The number two stat is just being able to move the football and put it in the end zone, whether that's, driving your team down and letting the run game take over in the red zone or at the goal line. He's not the flashiest player, but he has a good enough arm. His accuracy is probably his strong suit, as well as his smarts. That Ronnie Bell, I've talked about it a few times, but it was such an important play because you listen to Cade after the game and he said, the one-on-one coverage that he had with Ronnie Bell in the slot, and the look that Western Michigan showed was one that they didn't see on film coming into that game, but they were able to recognize at the line. He said he recognized it at the line, made a couple calls, and they were able to get, the hot route in. So I think things like that, the intangibles Cade McNamara has, are, off the charts. Doesn't have the crazy arm, like we said, maybe like J.J. McCarthy does. But I think it's good enough at this point. And right now, I saw it might have even have been on the broadcast because I was rewatching the game yesterday, but Dan Orlovsky and Bob Wischusen were talking about, potentially a quarterback controversy. I don't think there's anything close to that right now here in Ann Arbor. Maybe down the road in the season if McNamara struggles, but I think people kind of are downplaying a little bit just how efficient and effective he was early on in that game. So, about as good as you could have gotten out of the quarterbacks because you get some experience for J.J. McCarthy late in the game. And when he came in, the crowd was just going crazy for him.
Yeah, I highly doubt if there is a quarterback controversy inside the room on campus where it matters. Now, amongst the fans,
right,
maybe because the fans are going to watch that one play from McCarthy. Almost said McCaffrey because I still got Dylan McCaffrey in my head, but J.J. McCarthy. But there's a difference between making a pass and showing off elite talent versus running the offense play after play after play, getting yourself in the right play and all those things, and running the offense versus just showing off the arm. Two different things. All right, yeah. Clayton, we got Washington coming in here, and as we alluded to, can't take the Huskies lightly despite a very curious score in Montana. Against Montana, they lose 13-7. I just watched a couple highlights. Obviously couldn't move the ball either on the ground or in the air. And something that you wouldn't expect is that the top 25 Washington Huskies will not be in the top 25. Maybe Michigan squeezes their way into the top 25 for this Washington game. Regardless, that doesn't matter. But I got to expect Washington's going to bounce back and show up on Saturday night.
Yeah, I would think so too. I think one of two things can happen after a game like that. If you're Washington, you can bounce back with a vengeance and come in and try to surprise Michigan. A Michigan team that, again, I don't think is letting its guard down because they know what it's like last season winning that opener and then having a letdown. So I think that they are, Aiden Hutchinson said it after the game, we haven't done a damn thing yet. And he's right. I mean, they were supposed to beat Western Michigan pretty handily. If you're Michigan and if you're a good team, so you haven't done anything yet. This is still a Washington team that has a lot of talent. They were without a few wide receivers in that game. I haven't watched the whole thing either yet. I'm planning to tonight. I have it on my DVR. So I'm excited to see what went wrong for them, and was it just kind of a one game type of thing, or are they weak at some of these positions? Maybe they thought they weren't coming in. That'll be interesting. Dylan Morris, from what I saw, their quarterback, did not play very well. His wide receivers had quite a few drops, including Giles Jackson, former Michigan wide receiver, dropping a fourth down play late in the game there. But it shouldn't have been that close to begin with. So I'm excited to watch that film. But overall, I think that going back to what I was saying earlier, you have one of two ways Washington can approach this game. They can come back with a vengeance, or they can kind of just be a broken and torn and tattered team coming into the big house, traveling across the country, being upset after that first game. So I think we'll be able to know right away in this game what kind of mindset Washington has, and also Michigan bringing that energy. The Wolverines are 7-2 in night games at the big house since they began playing them in 2011. Remember, the lights weren't installed until, very recent here, just a decade ago. So I think it's going to be a good crowd. I think Michigan will be ready to play. I think Washington, though, if I had to guess, will be much more ready to play than they were a week ago. And they might have been, preparing for Michigan at times throughout training camp. Jim Harbaugh said they were preparing for Washington a little bit, and they might have been overlooking Montana. So if their players were overlooking Montana, if you're a Washington fan, you're probably hoping that it was at least for the bigger goal of beating Michigan, I guess. But I expect a pretty close game. That line moved from 1 to 5.5 now is where Michigan opened. So I think that feels about right. Michigan with a slight edge here, but it could go either way.
Yeah, I just saw a couple of highlights from the Washington-Montana game and how Montana closed out the game. But, it's obvious from the stat sheet that you would expect a high-level Power 5 to push around an FCS in the trenches, and they couldn't. They couldn't run the ball, 2.5 yards per carry. And then even when they went to the air, they completed a decent amount, not a great amount, but 27 of 46 is whatever, 55 to 60%. And 3 picks, and they only had 226 yards off all those completions. So their receivers were not getting loose for big plays at all. And you mentioned your old buddy Giles Jackson. He caught 4 balls, but the big drop you mentioned, and the 4 balls only for 15 yards. So he couldn't get free either. Montana must be a world beater, or Washington was just looking past them. We will find out a lot.
I was going to say, credit Montana. I mean, good for them.
Absolutely.
But as you kind of mentioned earlier, some of those week 1 games can be deceiving. We've seen it, as I've mentioned a couple times, because I think it's so relevant this week with Michigan on the good side. Winning a game like that. In 2018, they lose to Notre Dame and the sky was falling, and then they won 10 straight games. You go back to the Lloyd Carr days when Michigan lost to Appalachian State, then lost to Oregon, but then they turned things around and ended up being the team, for at least for a stretch of games there. I know they didn't beat Ohio State at the end of the season, but being the team that people thought, or close to it, that they would be coming into the year. So Washington's season is not over. This is a long season. People are forgetting it's not a 4-game season like it was for the Huskies last year. It's a 12-game season. Plenty of time to turn it around. That could start this weekend. That's why Michigan has to play well to win.
Yeah, there's a ton of examples out there. You mentioned you brought it up. If I was going to bring up 07 Apple, I know I would have had to apologize or something, but Clayton brought it up. So anyway, that Michigan team turned out to finish in the top 10, beat Florida in the Capital One Bowl that year. So they were a good team. And Northwestern a couple of years ago lost to Akron in non-conference play, and they were in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. We could go on and on with examples all over the place of it's not good, but it's been bounced back from in the past many, many times. Clayton, we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy the game on Saturday night. Big one, Washington at Michigan, prime time, ABC, 8 o'clock Eastern time. All eyes on the Big House. Thanks a lot, Clayton.
Yep. Thanks for having me.